So let me ask you something. What really makes for a good life? I mean, a truly wonderful life. Is it about finding that perfect state of peace and calm where nothing can bother you? Or is it something a little messier, a little more intense, something passionate? That's the huge question we're going to tackle in this explainer. On his deathbed, the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, a man famous for being brilliant but also famously tortured by his own thoughts, he said this: "Tell them I had a wonderful life." Just think about that for a second. What a stunning thing to say. But what could he have possibly meant? What kind of life earns the title wonderful? This very question has been at the heart of philosophy for, well, forever. And when you dig into it, the whole debate really seems to boil down to this one major conflict. On one side, you have what we'll call the thin life. This is a life that's all about rationality, about finding tranquility. And on the other side, we've got the thick life, a life defined by its passions, its deep, messy engagements, and just its emotional richness. So let's really break down what these two ideals are all about. Okay, so first up, let's talk about the thin life. Now, the argument for this one has a seriously long and distinguished history. We're talking about some of the greatest thinkers who ever lived, and they champion this idea because it promised something we're all still looking for today, a kind of unshakable inner peace. Yeah, this is not some fringe idea. This is like a heavyweight champion in the world of philosophy. Think about the ancient Greek Stoics or Spinoza. And it's not just in the West. You see it in Eastern traditions like Buddhism and Taoism too. They all basically believe that our emotions make us vulnerable, right? Anger, fear, even intense joy, they all depend on stuff that's outside of our control. So for them, being ruled by your emotions was like being a slave, and the only way to be truly free was to rise above all that turbulence. The ancient Greeks even had these very specific, kind of fancy words for this perfect state of mind: ataraxia, apatheia. And this wasn't just about, feeling chilled out. No, this was about building a fortress inside your own mind, a state of total calm that was invulnerable to the chaos of the outside world. For these philosophers, getting to that state wasn't just a nice little bonus, it was the entire point of living. Emotion was the problem, and pure reason was the only solution. But what if that entire picture is just wrong? What if the goal isn't to escape our emotions, but to dive right into them? This brings us to a really powerful counterargument, one championed by the philosopher Robert C. Solomon. So Solomon looked at this classic ideal of a calm, rational life and basically said, it's just too thin. I love how he puts it. He argued that real life isn't thin, it's fat, it's messy, it's just overflowing with possibilities and passions. He felt that philosophy had tried to boil all of that richness down to a few bare-bones principles, and in the process had completely missed the whole point of what makes life worth living in the first place. So what's the alternative then? Well, Solomon called it the passionate life, and this is not a life that's aiming for peace and quiet. Not at all. It's a life that's defined by its intense engagements. It's about having quests, grand projects that you throw your entire self into, and affections that you embrace with everything you've got. And it's really important to get this. Solomon does not sugarcoat what this means. A passionate life isn't just about happy, warm, fuzzy feelings. No way. It can involve total frenzy, ambition that's so big it almost hurts. It can mean what Kierkegaard called a sickness unto death. It can mean chasing goals you can never quite reach, and loving people in ways that seem totally destined for heartbreak. The point is to embrace the entire spectrum of intense human experience, the glorious and the grueling. Okay, so if we're on board with this idea of a passionate life, it forces us to do a radical rethink of one of philosophy's oldest concepts, virtue. What does it actually mean to be a good person in this new picture? So the traditional view, going all the way back to Aristotle, is that virtues are the things that help us control our emotions, right? Courage helps you control fear. Temperance helps you control desire. The passions are like these wild horses, and virtue is the rider holding the reins tight. But Solomon just flips this whole thing on its head. He asks, what if the passion itself is the virtue? What if the wild horse is the whole point? Now, the classic argument against this is pretty straightforward. Aristotle said, look, virtues have to be stable, dependable parts of who you are. And passions, he argued, are just fleeting feelings. You can't build a moral life on something so temporary, so unreliable. It'd be like trying to build a house on quicksand. But Solomon's comeback here is so powerful. He says we're thinking about passion all wrong. We're confusing a quick flash of anger with a true, deep passion. I mean, think about love. Is real, deep love fleeting? Of course not. It can be incredibly durable, even intractable. A deep passion like love isn't some momentary feeling. It can be the organizing principle for your entire life. And to really put this idea to the test, Solomon zooms in on the ultimate example, the most powerful, chaotic, celebrated, and feared passion of them all, romantic love. A lot of old-school philosophers were really suspicious of romantic love. Arthur Schopenhauer famously called it trash and wondered why we put up with all the noise and fuss that gets in the way of serious stuff. To him, it was just a biological trick, a pretty meaningless disruption to a rational life. Solomon takes that super cynical view and asks this revolutionary question: what if Schopenhauer had it completely backwards? What if all that noise and fuss isn't a distraction from a good life? What if it is one of its greatest virtues? So he breaks down why love is a virtue into 3 key parts. First, it creates this intense, firm attachment, a bond that's strong enough to get you through all the storms life throws at you. Second, its excitement comes from embracing uncertainty. You're literally tying your future to someone else's. And third, and this is huge, its virtue is in accepting a lack of control, in letting go of that old philosophical ideal of being a totally independent, self-sufficient person. And this is a direct shot at guys like Immanuel Kant. Kant argued that an action only has real moral worth if you do it out of a sense of duty, not just because you feel like it, what he called inclination. So for Kant, helping someone because you feel love for them is nice and all, but it's not truly a moral act. Solomon is saying, no. That feeling, that passionate inclination is precisely where the moral power and virtue is. Now, Solomon wasn't some lone voice crying out in the wilderness. His defense of the passionate life is part of a bigger philosophical tradition, one that celebrates this inner fire, this energy, as the true source of a good life. And you absolutely cannot talk about a philosophy of passion without talking about Friedrich Nietzsche. He famously called himself an immoralist, but not because he was against ethics. He was against a morality based on being quiet, being obedient, and suppressing our deepest, most powerful drives. This is one of Nietzsche's most provocative and, honestly, most misunderstood statements. When he asks, what is good, his answer has nothing to do with being calm or well-behaved. For him, goodness is whatever heightens that feeling of power, of enthusiasm, of energy inside a person. And it's so important to get this right. Nietzsche's ideal is not about dominating other people. It's an internal thing, an ethic of strength and self-mastery. But for him, mastering yourself didn't mean crushing your passions. It meant harnessing them, shaping them, cultivating them into something powerful and life-affirming. It's all about energy and enthusiasm, not quiet compliance. Which, of course, leaves us with one last really challenging question to think about. For centuries, philosophy called us that the measure of a good life is control. Control over our emotions, over our situations, over our desires. But what if that's just the wrong way to measure it entirely? What if the real measure of a wonderful life isn't how much control you have, but is instead about the depth, the richness, and the intensity of the passions you're willing to live for?